Hey guys, it's been a while since I made a video because I think I was too far ahead. If I wasn't too far ahead and y'all been waiting for another chapter, I apologize. I'm going to start on page 257, okay? 257, and that's chapter 26. And let's get started, okay? Serafina screamed. "Don't hurt the cloak, you stupid child," Thorn snarled at her. Wounded and crazed, he yanked her to the ground, knocked the wind out of her, and held her down. "If you destroy it, then we'll lose everything." She struggled to escape him, but he clenched her by the arms and she couldn't get free. "We'll work together," he rasped. "You with your abilities and me with mine. Don't you see? We're the same. We're on the same side." Something was happening to him. Thorn's face was gray and deteriorating, his skin flaking off around his cheeks and his eyes. His hair had turned gray and wiry, and his mouth dripped with blood. A wave of revulsion poured through her. Blech. She tried to kick him and bite his hands and pull herself free, but she couldn't wrest herself from his grip. He held her to the ground with all his weight, pushing the air painfully from her lungs. She could feel her ribs bending, starting to crack. Despite his wounds and his decomposing condition, Thorn seemed to be getting stronger and stronger, driven by his greed for the cloak. "I'll never give in to you," she snarled into his face. "Never." "Then you're going to die, little mouser." Pressing her down, he crushed into her. She couldn't breathe. Without air flowing through her lungs, she couldn't move, couldn't think. Even as she fought to get away, she felt her life draining from her, her arms and legs falling limp, her mind clouding with the white light of death. She thought there was supposed to be a sense of peace when death finally came, but she didn't feel it. There was still too much to do in her life, still too many questions to answer, too many mysteries to solve, and it was the mysteries, the unfinished business, the want that kept her going. She didn't want to die, especially not this way, but she could feel herself drifting now, the life ebbing out of her, her soul slipping away. But she kept seeing a vision of her pa in her mind. She could hear his voice. "Eat your grits, girl," he demanded. "I'm not gonna eat my grits," she shouted back at him. Her pa gazed at her dying on the ground beneath her enemy's weight and shook his head. "The rat don't kill the cat, girl," he said. "That just ain't right." "The rat don't kill the cat." She thought as she pulled her wayward soul back into her body with fierce determination. The rat don't kill the cat. She thought again as she felt a burst of new strength. She began to fight anew, pulling her arm free from her captor. At that moment, a large black shape lunged out of the mist with a ferocious snarl and a flash of white teeth. At first, she thought it must be some kind of a black wolf, but it wasn't a wolf. It was a dog, a Doberman. It was Gideon. Gideon bit into Thorn's side and pulled him to the ground, then plunged in for another attack, biting and snapping. Thorn grabbed his fallen dagger from the ground and slashed Gideon in the side. Gideon yelped in pain and pulled back. Then the mountain lion charged out of her den and dove into the battle. She attacked Thorn with rapid swats of her clawed paws, her teeth snarling and her ears pressed back against her head, as if she was mightily perturbed that he hadn't stayed dead. Plunging back into the fight, the wounded Gideon chomped Thorn's arm, forcing him to drop the dagger. then tore into his shoulder and dragged him viciously across the ground, shaking him. Serafina spotted the black cloak lying on the ground. She darted into the battle and snatched up the dagger that had fallen from Thorn's hand. Then she attacked the cloak with the blade. She was sure this was the answer. She cut and stabbed, trying to slice through the material. But the cloak fought against her, twisting and turning and rattling, becoming a black, seething coil in her hands. The cloak clutched at her and wrapped itself around her arms, and then her body, and began to crush her. No matter how hard she tried, she could not cut the snaking cloth. That's kind of cool how they call it a snaking cloth when they described it like a boa constrictor, huh? That was kind of cool. As the folds of the black cloak slithered around her neck and began to tighten, she tried to scream for help, but the cloak choked her breath short. Nothing but horrible gagging noises escaped from her clasped throat. Gasping for breath and clutching at her neck, she struggled to get up onto her feet. She stumbled toward the statue of the angel in the middle of the glade. It had sliced my finger with the slightest touch. In one swift motion, she hurled herself onto the point of the angel's gleaming sword. The sword slashed the side of her neck with searing pain as its tip pierced the folds of the cloak that was around her neck. The cloak screamed and hissed as the razor-sharp edges cut into it. Serafina grabbed at her neck and tore the cloak away, then clenched the material in her fists and jammed the cloak onto the sword point. She pierced it again and again. The cloak slithered and screeched, coiling like a tortured serpent. It writhed in her hands as she tore the cloth, but she did not relent. When she was finally done, there was nothing left of the black cloak but shreds lying at the angel's feet. Serafina fell away, panting and exhausted, pressing her hand to the wound at her neck to staunch the bleeding. She looked over and saw Thorn pinned to the ground beneath her allies. Thorn was strong, but without the black cloak, he was no match for the speed, power, and jaws of both Gideon and the lioness. Serafina felt a wave of triumph pass through her. They'd done it. It was all over. It had to be. But as Gideon and the lioness struck the final killing bites into Thorn, his body emitted a frightening sizzling sound, like meat burning on a fire. His carcass vibrated as his skin burned and peeled down into blood and bones. A thick cloud of smoke emanated from his body as it rapidly disintegrated, as if enkindled by the air itself. Gideon stepped back and tilted his head in confusion. The lioness retreated into the den to protect her cubs. The stinking black effluence poured forth until the roiling smoke filled the entire glade. The whole area became a great choking cloud. Serafina coughed, waved her arms, and tried to escape from the smoke. "Come on, Gideon," she called, and pulled him back as she gagged on the horrible taste of the smoke in her throat. Overwhelmed by the fumes and unable to see, she tripped over something and fell face first to the ground. Whatever she tripped over was hard, like a branch. But when she looked, she realized it wasn't a branch. It was a human leg. She whimpered in horror and scrambled away from it. The body of a little girl lay on the ground, her arms and legs tangled and bent at crooked angles. Ooh. That is the end of chapter 26. I'm going to start right up again on chapter 27, but I'm going to put them in two different slides for you, okay? So you'll be able to find them both. Enjoy chapter 26. That was pretty good. And I'll see you in a minute.